we had learned of the big trends of the last 25 years we have been studying them and what that might mean for the future. And it became pretty quickly clear to us that a lot of the things that we had learned would not necessarily help us make the right decisions in the future. We have all grown up in an exceptionally benevolent economic time. It has been the great moderation, when interest rates were down, asset prices were up, uncertainty was declining, and every generation was wealthier than the next one. But when we looked ahead, it was very likely that many of those trends that we had studied were not going to continue in the same way they had in the past. We couldn't simply assume that we could extrapolate from what was happening because they were coming together at a speed and scale that we had never seen before. So what I'll try to do in the next few minutes is to give you a sense of what that might mean for cities and why you might want to question some of the assumptions that you have brought up and the intuition that you have built over the last few decades, simply because the world may look quite different. And when you looked at the trends, there were really four that were at the heart of the disruption. The first one is the rise of the emerging market cities, the real mass urbanization. Second one, relentless technological change. Third one, aging. And last, increasing global connectedness. None of these are new. You have all heard plenty of each one of them. But the way they come together right now is new and different. So let's start with the first one, of the urbanization across emerging markets. We expect that roughly 440 cities will generate half of global growth in the next 10 years. You already saw some of the names of those cities. It may be that you probably know the 20 megacities in the emerging world. You even have visited many of them, but there is hundreds more that you have never heard of. Yet those are the cities that will fundamentally shape how the world will look like in a few decades. First of all, they'll make a lion's share of a lot of the investments that the world is going to make. And how well those investments are made are going to determine a lot of the returns to capital we'll make and the kinds of returns we'll get to the savings for our retirement funds. They will also make decisions about their transportation, about their housing shells. That will lock in their energy consumption for decades to come, and of course translate into energy costs for all of us. And also, the socio-political decisions that these cities make will fundamentally shape the kind of a world that our grandchildren will inherit. For the Atlantic cities, the challenge, of course, is that a lot of these cities are in the Pacific area. So the question is, how well is your city aware and connected to the emerging global centers? The second trend that we spend a lot of time studying is disruptive technologies. There are some technology pessimists out there who say that we are running out of ideas. We absolutely don't think so. There has never been a time when the pipeline for technological innovation has been stronger than it is today. It's coming from all different directions, whether it's robots and autonomous vehicles, big data and Internet of Things, new kinds of materials, genomics. The challenge really is no longer, as we used to think of technology, which was the predictable rate of Moore's law bringing down the cost of computing. Now the challenge is that we don't know from which direction the technology disruption is going to come from, how big it will be, I mean, which ones are the ones that will really matter, and how will it influence your job, your city, your nation, your family. And the only thing we can probably say is that the disruptions that we are going to see that are going to be the biggest ones are the ones that we can least predict. And let me give you just one example, using autonomous vehicles as the example. I think it's pretty easy to see what are the first order impacts of autonomous vehicles. I think we all look forward to being able to use the time we have to spend on a car most productively by working on the back seat. Even the second order effects are relatively predictable. We'll probably need fewer cars when there's more sharing and when you really don't need to have your car sitting in the parking lot next to you. But it's the third order effects that make things more interesting. So for cities, the obvious big thing is that the amount of space we dedicate to parking is enormous. It's at the city centers, at the most valuable real estate space of the world. So for example, I live in California. Los Angeles parking alone, the space dedicated to parking, is more than all of San Francisco's land space. So that is some of the most valuable real estate around the globe. And when we have autonomous vehicles, we might not need that any longer, because first of all, they might be picking up the next person after having dropped me off, or even in the case that I insist on having my own car, the car may drive itself and park somewhere into a much further away from the city center. So that's a third order effect, but it goes much, much further. For some of us who are parents of teenage drivers, of course, the best news is the fact that we'll very likely see fewer accidents, and that's great news on most fronts, except if you are waiting for an organ. And so the organ donor program means that they will probably have their supply pretty hardly hit. So that's going to be just many, many different layers, and we can go on and on. There's many other examples of how things will change. And I think that's something we are probably not prepared for. So the question on this front is, how broadly are you looking at the things that might disrupt what you are doing today? Third one is aging. And this one is going to hit cities particularly hard. And the reason is that cities have always prospered because of their people. And I mean that very literally. When you look since 2000, the GDP growth in cities, 60% of that growth has come from the fact that there are more people in the large cities in the world. 40% the rest has come from the fact that GDP per capita has increased. Yet when we look ahead, we know lower fertility rates and aging are going to lead to lower overall population growth. But in addition to that, the rural to urban migration that used to add to the city's population growth, that is also plateauing. So they're no longer that benefit to cities. So it's going to be a very different situation. Already from 2000 to today, 6% of world's largest cities have seen their populations decline. 1 out of 6 cities in the Western world is going to be in that situation in the next 10 years. 1 out of 6. And 60% of developed world cities will have fewer young adults in 2030 than they have today. So that's going to feel very different for many cities. The competition for people is going to be a lot harder. And it's not going to be just competition for the much coveted, skilled millennials. It's also about attracting retirees, being more effective and more capable of integrating your immigrants into the local economy and making them a real engine for themselves and for the city. And very fundamentally, it's about being able to educate and give the skills to the cohorts of increasingly diverse younger folks to make sure they are ready for the jobs of the future. So how is that demographic change going to influence your city, and how prepared are you for that change in demographics? So last one then is the increased global connectedness. And this is an area where clearly globalization has been with us for a while already. We know that since 1990, global trade has increased 13-fold. Global capital flows have increased 23-fold. But when you look at the digital flows, that really is changing things quite dramatically. In just the last 10 years, we have seen a 45 times increase in the digital flows across borders. And that will actually make things qualitatively different from just increasing trade. And there is many, many different ways in which that will happen. We'll have a very different global environment. But let me just highlight 3 examples. It's going to be very different for governments. In the past, we pretty much could track what was crossing borders with goods and services. Right now, with the digital flows, it's very hard for governments to know what is crossing their borders. It is just not something we can track. We don't have the data. It's hard to know. It's very different for businesses. For many big businesses, this means that you will have competitors from other parts of the world that you didn't even think could exist. So think of the media market. It used to be relatively local. You have the local TV and local newspapers and magazines. Now, with all the digital news available, the Twitters, the Facebooks, the YouTubes, it is a very different world, and a lot of the competition becomes immediately global. On the flip side, for many of the small businesses, they now have access to big global markets that they didn't necessarily have. So for example, Amazon has over 2 million small businesses on their platform, of which, at least based in the US, you don't necessarily know where that business is based on. So for small businesses, it can be very different. There is 50 million of those in Facebook announcing their services. So clearly, connectedness is going to be another one of those that are going to change the world quite dramatically. And the question is, in that digital world, how is your city positioned? So across the board, these 4 trends are very dramatically changing the world, and I think in ways that we can't even imagine right now. But for cities, the big question is that you really don't want to just sit back and watch the show and see what happens. Cities are at the heart of this, and the kinds of decisions they make today will fundamentally shape how these trends coming together will influence the outcomes. And for that reason, I would really strongly encourage all of you and your cities to really think very much as the mayor earlier said, of what kind of city do you want to be, and how you can take advantage of this change to position your city for that future and make it look like the way you want your city to be. Thank you.
Hola, Bilbao. Hola, ¿qué tal? Bien, 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 bien. We have a fantastic panel coming up now to discuss that which Jaana has just put out there for us. But I did want to say one thing, and it's an amazing group we have here. We have, creo que somos 140 personas, líderes, ¿no? También somos 60 ciudades y también somos 13 países. Un grupo magnificente de cerebros. Yes, we are 140 different leaders. We are some 60 cities. We are 13 countries. A great group of brains that are out here today, and we're going to run through as much as we can. We also have 5 of those brains up here today, and I'm going to introduce them very, very briefly. Right here we have Harriet Tregoning. She is the Principal Deputy Secretary, Office of Community Planning and Development from HUD. Thank you for being here. Next to her, we have Ansgar, Head of Government Relations from EMEA HP. Good to see you as well. And sitting next to Ansgar, we have Tonya Allen, President from the Skillman Foundation. And next to Tonya, we have Xabier Ochandiano, City Councilor for Economic Development, Employment, and Trade, Bilbao City Council. And of course, we just heard from Jaana, Remes, partner, McKinsey Global Institute. So, we've got 60 minutes together, and as we do go through this together, all 140 of us, we will have several questions for you, and that is why Geraldine went through the app a little bit earlier. My name is Richard Louie. I'm with MSNBC and NBC News in the United States, formerly with CNN Worldwide. It is always great to be here to be part of the German Marshall Fund in these conversations today. I'll start with you, Harriet. If you could describe what you do in one sentence.
So I'm an urbanist and a planner, and I work on trying to make communities and cities stronger and better.
I can hear you, but I'm not sure the mic can.
All right, microphone on? All right,
Yep.
right. Hi there. I take care of HP's government relations in Europe, Middle East, Africa, diverse bunch of countries and many interesting topics.
Great, Tonya?
I'm a serial ideapreneur.
We like that.
And I like to make sure that execution trumps everything.
Mm.
Hi, I am a young politician now, and my responsibility is to improve the competitiveness of the city of Bilbao and to improve the opportunities to have jobs and to develop the economy.
Jaana.
And I work with amazing teams of young people to bring facts to some of the biggest questions that the world economy is facing.
Well, let me ask you this. Again, if you can keep your answers short, just to set us off in terms of the headline, and since we are talking about social media today and how well it did last year, let's keep the conversation going outside of this fantastic building. What does build, urban transformation, innovation, and leadership mean to you today, and why is it important to talk about this today? Ansgar.
I think we see a lot of discontent with globalization these days, creating a lot of political risks for businesses as well. So we deeply care about this because we are stakeholders. We depend on an open economy. I think the success of many cities will be a major impact on if globalization, free trade will survive or not. So the battleground for globalization will be in urban cities, and that's why we care about it. And this is why this conference is right on spot and the right time. It's a very urgent issue.
Tonya, and build upon that, as you know, we're putting this in the backdrop of what might be the second, the third digital wave that we've seen internationally.
So I would say a couple things. I think one is that cities have life cycles, and to Ansgar's point, I believe that the life cycle is really shifting with this global urbanization that's happening. So I think that we have to really think about that in a different way. And then I think there are lots of cities who are taking this pivot to be different places because of globalization, but we're making the pivot without really thinking about the technological innovations that are happening.
Not thinking before we move.
Not thinking. We're innovating to the you know, we're innovating to the most recent idea,
Yeah.
when in order to win, you actually have to innovate beyond that
Yeah.
idea. We have to be 2 or 3 steps ahead.
So Xabier, you think, you've been in Bilbao, you were here 15 years ago thinking about what it was going to be like today. Tell me about what build means to you and why we need to be talking about this.
Well, for us probably is the most important opportunity in the city during the year to share. That's an important point for us. Changes are going so fast, especially in technology, but not only in technology, that many times from the public responsibility, it's difficult to go at that so high speed. And that's so important to collaborate in a public partnership, but also to learn and to know more about the privates who are developing technology, and to see and to try to understand that technology itself is not a goal, but it's the most important instrument we need also to plan better.
Plan better. Jaana.
Well, cities really have always been the global engines of growth, yet they have been that because they have enabled humans to thrive. I think
Right.
for me, build really is about how can we make cities enable everyone to thrive. There is examples of cities that are just brilliant at that, and they just become engines of humans being better. Right now, I think we are failing on some of the groups of our folks. So I think this really, for me, is about how can we make cities places where everyone can thrive.
These are the building blocks of what we like
Yeah.
to talk about at such 50,000-foot levels all the time, and sometimes we forget that's where it's always made. Go local, right? Go local. So the way that we're going to talk about this entire topic that all 5 of you have laid out so well, I missed you, didn't I? Please go. I'm sorry. What does build mean to you? Harriet, sorry.
I would simply say that in a time of so much technological change, that cities themselves have to be innovative. They have to be willing to try things. They have to learn rapidly. They have to do what technology companies do. They have to prototype. They have to fail, but fail fast.
Right.
They have to basically, it's hard for government, it's hard for cities to fail, but they have to create a culture where it's possible to do that. And I entirely agree with what Jaana said, that we're doing a terrible job with many populations in our cities, and we need to really be working in particular to try to do better for them.
And that's a really good point, right? Because you don't get elected. You don't get appointed if you fail in cities, in localities, and metropolitan areas. So that dynamic, that stress that exists there, a really good point to be made there, Harriet. Now, I want to, with that sort of backdrop of why we're talking about it today, as well as what this means to all of our panelists here today, talk about it in 3 different ways. And this is really a setup for tomorrow and the day after's conversation. First, we'd like to look at it as in terms of people. Second, place. And then third, economy. And those are the 3 spaces that we're going to look at. And I have a question to ask you, if you can pull out your apps very quickly, that will set it up for our panelists here. And our first question is with regard to people. And the question that we have laid out for you is this: what is the single most important driver/force driving talent pool development in the transatlantic economy? This is a word cloud, so just punch in the word or 2 words that you think answers this question, and we'll start it right now. Now, what we'll do is we'll give you 30 seconds as our panelists also think about this. Oh, we'll give you 45. It's a special day here. There are barajas here. You get an extra 15 seconds at the Guggenheim. But again, the question: what is the single most important driver/force driving talent pool development in the transatlantic economy? And we've got 25 more seconds. What we're going to do as you're filling out that question, after our panelists reflect on this, I will get their response and then yours. We'll go out there if you have any specific questions for our panelists. And in case you wanted to know what's happening over here, we have a talented artist that is drawing real-time our discussion. And so I've been fascinated by what's happening here, in case you're wondering why we have this easel. All right, great. And so the outcomes as the data still comes in: quality, education, technology, creativity, opportunity. What surprises you here, Tonya, when you look at these words, when we think about the importance of human capital, when we look at cities today and urban development in this digital wave, in this digital economy?
Yeah, well, when I think about that question and I look at these words, I would come up, my word would probably be scarcity.
Scarcity.
Because
Yeah.
I really believe that when you look at across the transatlantic continuum, we all know that we're aging. We all know that many of us believe that there are a few small ideas, there are a few big ideas, and we
Right.
all are aiming for. We're all aiming to try and get new millennials into our communities. But I think what we often forget is that we actually are not living in a time of scarcity. We leave lots of talent on the table.
Where do we
in
leave
these
them? Where do we leave it?
I think in untraditional communities of color in the U.S., many of the migrant communities in Europe, we are leaving them. We're not making the kind of investments that actually allow them to be considered these innovators and the drivers of our economic growth.
Mm-hmm.
And if we don't engage them, we won't win.
For you, Ansgar, in Berlin and in Germany, what have you seen at HP? Have you been able to get the quality, the educated, those who are creative into the space that you need?
Yeah, maybe just to add to this one, I think one of the most apparent faults is still that we didn't really provide the environment for women with children to integrate quickly and
Right.
Efficiently back in the workforce. So I see it every day in Berlin. Like you could tell, or you could imagine that this place should be really open to it, but I still see a lot of gaps there. With regard to HP, it's interesting because, we have one leg in the software camp and the other one in completely different technologies, which is very much about material sciences. So we do a lot with ink, we do 3D printing, etc. pp. So we are looking for hardware people as well. And the interesting thing is that the innovation hubs on material sciences, next generation materials, is not the software clusters, it's other cities with industrial backgrounds. City like Bilbao, other cities who have basically in history in the 19th century dealing with hardware. And this is the talent pools which are interesting for us, and we're specifically targeting those sites because we know these are people we need. We want to be the company which has this ability to combine IT expertise with material sciences,
Right.
therefore we target this. So for us, it's actually interesting times to see that there's a new interest in real-world stuff, not only in
Sure.
software code. Right?
Well, talking about real-world stuff, and to your point about this gender opportunity, Harriet, as you've gone across the United States, as well as abroad, and talked about what makes this stuff tick, human capital, what is the gender option? What are we leaving on the table when we're looking at this?
Well, I think gender certainly plays out, but when I saw quality, I thought, oh, they're missing quality of place, quality of life. That I thought that is the quality that I was thinking of up there, and that in a time when jobs really follow the talent, and certainly you can't be in Bilbao and not think about the fabulous quality of place here and in many places in Europe, and that's certainly been driving a lot of the resurgence of cities in the U.S. when there are transportation choices, when there are housing choices, when there are amenities, when the quality of place is wonderful, it really has made a huge difference. And I think part of that, as far as women are concerned, is safety. I think these transportation choices really matter, and I think it also makes cities more resilient. If we've had a great recession and the
Right.
places that had those choices were able to weather those recessions
Yeah.
much better because people were able to dial down their housing and transportation costs. There was choice.
Yeah, some of the spaces I've seen grow into the gender opportunity, like out of Silicon Valley, girls who code. We're really looking at places where we don't have the balance, where we don't have that talent pool, but it's sitting right there. It's because of what we have in the pipeline, girls who code. Xabier, what's really interesting that you and I were talking about earlier is when you were helping businesses grow here in País Vasco, you had a hit rate of businesses that you help about 25%, right?
Yeah.
They succeeded.
Yeah.
And that's only gotten better. What's the magic dust you're using when it comes to people, right, to be here in this large metropolitan area, some 2 million people, right?
Well, the real thing is that it's not magic dust. That doesn't exist, and it's only work, try to improve every day. And I completely agree with her, and I will link quality and life, which is there. I think that they are going together, but we have to understand what means quality of life for every person, because in different cities, in different countries, they can consider in different ways quality of life. In our case, what is important is to provide economic development and job opportunities. Mm-hmm. In our case, that's the political priority. In this sense, We are trying to do important efforts with mainly young people, entrepreneurs and startups, trying to develop, helping to develop their business plans, but also trying to attract foreign investment. Mm-hmm. So it's a multiple, via multiple work, and just to have this quality of life, because we are really proud what we have done in the past,
right,
considering the urban transformation, but we have to continue improving.
So, Jaana, that is perfect what Xabier is saying, which you've probably seen in your research here, because there are examples around the world, in Europe and in the West, where you have seen structures being built to create this, we're going to get the people thing, right? Singapore is a great example, where they put up structures in the city, edifices, processes, but the people didn't come. Talk about culture and what Xabier is really hat-tipping towards here, and getting the right smart folk, the right people that plug in, no matter where they're from.
Well, I think it depends on who are the people you're looking for, and that's the cool thing. Because we are going to see slowing population growth, we'll need to be looking at them from different places. I think there's a way to attract the young millennials, and I would give 2 examples from the US, Austin and Portland. Austin in Texas has a logo called Keep Austin Weird. Portland is known for a TV program on Portlandia that is now known all the way to Japan. So middle-sized cities doing that magic. But I think there's many other ways to do that. And one thing that we haven't mentioned, one of the groups that we should look at is the retiring baby boomers. It's the biggest, most educated cohort that will have a lot of free time. That is a hugely untapped opportunity. Where that time is going to be spent. In the US alone, we estimate that in the next 15 years, we'll have 24 million full-time job amount of time freed by those folks.
Yeah.
In addition, what are they going to do with that time is a huge potential.
So as the talent pool gravitates towards where all the action is, what happens to these so-called second-tier cities? What happens to them? Anybody on the panel here?
Well, we're hearing some examples from Jaana just now. It's the places like San Francisco, New York, even Washington. Increasingly, the cost of living is so high in the U.S. that people have no choice but to look other places. Sometimes it might be Oakland or other cities in the Bay Area just outside of San Francisco. In other cases, it's Nashville, right? It's places like Santa Barbara. It's places that are much smaller, but that have a great quality of life, that can be attractive.
Austin, these cities that were at one point second-tier cities, at one point.
Right, but I also would just say, I think that what cities are doing, and either they're big or large or medium-sized, the ones that succeed are the ones who actually know their own DNA. They know what is unique about them as a city, and then they are masterful about figuring out how to brand that.
Detroit. How did Detroit do that? Because you're having this resurgence of talent coming back. What was the magic sauce there?
I mean, I think the magic sauce for us is our DNA is that we're gritty and we're resilient. Like if you want to come to a place where you know people are going to work hard and produce something positive, even if they've had a difficult time, then Detroit is the place to be. I often talk about when Berlin's mayor said we're poor. We're poor, but we're sexy. I mean, like that by itself, makes.
And that's tweetable. Like we're Detroit, poor, but we're sexy.
Yeah, and Detroit is poor. We're just working on the sexy part.
Yes. That's right. Ansgar, go ahead, please.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe just, from a German experience, Eastern Germany was basically a laboratory after reunification, because basically all economy was dead there, right? So clean sheet. Yeah. What happened was that those places which had a strong industrial background in the 19th century were the places where the new economy was working, right? Mm-hmm. Look at Dresden is now a cluster of silicon chip production, optics, etc. pp. So there is something which is very sticky about sites, cities, tier 2 cities which have an industrial history. And it doesn't go away even after 50 years of communism.
What is it? What's the stickiness?
Well,
is it the work hardness?
It's a knowledge of how to do business. It's a knowledge of how to combine the forces of public and private sector.
Right.
It's how to combine R&D with private companies. All that kind of stuff, which is probably the part of the magic sauce. Yeah. That's still there after 15 years of being suppressed brutally, right? Yeah. So see how sticky it is. And I think that's a great message for those tier 2 cities. look at 19th century history, look at the cities which were big there. I bet they will have a bright future because they know how to do it.
Yeah,
and I think Bilbao is a case in
It's a great example. It also comes to mind is Pittsburgh. Used to be part of the Rust Belt. Now it's a healthcare center. Xabier, please react to this idea of tier 2 cities now becoming tier 1 and that battle for talent.
Yeah, cities fight one against each other for talent, for young people mainly, for bringing technology and job opportunities, and that's quite complicated for a small city like Bilbao. So that's why we are trying to do so many efforts to be at a global scale, because it's not easy. We are only 350,000 inhabitants in the municipality. The metropolitan area is almost 1 million people, and Basque Country is 2.2 million people. But in that sense, I will say that the commitment of the citizens involved in their own, not only urban transformation, but then social and economic transformation has been important in the past, and it's probably the key of the future. How the citizens are involved and they believe that their city is going ahead. But it's really our big challenge. It's really complicated.
And it doesn't hurt that you have a beautiful coastal city here in Bilbao, right? That doesn't hurt at all. I want to go to the second question. And our second, if you'll construct the way we'll be looking at the discussion today, and that's place. What city, and if you could pull out your apps for this, we're putting it up right now, but which city will you be watching over the next year as a potential model of successful development during this so-called third digital wave? And again, you have 45 seconds. Which city will you be watching over the next year as a potential model of successful development during this third digital wave? Because on the panel so far, and we've got tons of ideas because I've already heard a lot. But let's think about that. What is that city and why? Right? Why are you watching the city? If you were to give us a benchmark that others can follow to think about and why, what that practice is that they're undertaking in this city. So again, we're now moving from people to place. 10 more seconds. Which city will you be watching over the next year as a potential model of successful development during this third digital wave? Interesting. Okay. Well, look at that, to our panel here. And I'm seeing a lot out of the West, some from Europe, all across Europe. Who would like to react to this?
Maybe a couple
just
of
go.
them.
By the way, panelists, the way I do it on my show is you just talk when you want, just don't talk too long.
Yeah.
So just go. You can talk, just, yeah.
Yeah, no, just looking at this again from the perspective of a company looking also at material sciences. Durham, Charlotte are obvious cases which have a history there. Akron, Ohio is another one. Cities which had a difficult history because they bet on industries which were declining rapidly in the Rust Belt, like rubber in Akron or material sciences. Now they're back, right? Now they're interesting. Now they're sexy again. And this is really the places where we will look for talent. And we think if R&D, if universities cooperate in the right way with companies in these places and are supported by cities, that's really could be a success.
Again, your city, what is it that you're watching? Tell me, you said that? Which cities you
Akron in Ohio, for example, is known as one of the tier 2 cities turning from loser to winner. Right?
Wow.
I think you said a key word there, and that's cooperation. So I think places that don't necessarily have a lot of money or aren't overflowing with investment and even talent have to look for other ways of creating a competitive advantage. And one of the things that U.S. cities in particular do very poorly is cooperate across boundaries, cooperate across institutions. And I think places like Pittsburgh, places like Columbus, other places that are really looking to create a culture of collaboration, cooperation, can create a real competitive advantage that other cities just don't have.
Right. I was going to say that I try to look for cities where I see a real civic muscle working, that you see cross-sectional groups of people with a vision and clarity, and that they're working in a way that breaks down barriers that allow them to innovate. And then the second thing I would say is I'm looking at places where innovation is going to have to drive it. So I think about like San Francisco, and I actually add Detroit to that. Detroit is the home, it's a mobility center for a long time for the world, automobile center of the world. Now we're trying to shift to a mobility center of the world. So what does that look like when you really think about autonomous cars?
What do you mean by mobility?
I mean, we were talking about biking, walking, transit. And so many cities started a lot of this before Detroit did, but I do think that Detroit has the opportunity to leapfrog in a lot of ways if we're very smart about it. And I think that the more that communities use the civic muscle to begin to open up those conversations so that more people are a part of that visioning, I think the faster you can go.
I'm fascinated here, Xabier, what you're thinking, and then Jaana, please, after that. Go ahead, Jaana. Yeah.
My city to watch actually was Stockholm, and I was struck that it was only one of 3 cities from Europe in here. There is Manchester, and there is
Amsterdam
and Budapest. Exactly.
Rotterdam.
I'm sorry, 4. And the reason why I'm watching Stockholm is that I think it's actually a city that is rich and sexy. For some, they have really been exceptionally successful in attracting the young millennials. I mean, they are a net importer of young folks who want to come for the startup scene. And it didn't start that way. So I think that's a really exciting city to watch.
Give me the definition of sexy in this conversation.
It is the one where the millennials with education, who all the cities want, that's where those folks are looking at that city and they want to spend their Friday evenings there after work.
I'm very interested, Xabier, what you think, because you've been in Bilbao now and you've probably been looking at a couple of benchmarks in your time. How's that benchmark city changed over time?
Yeah, probably it has changed geographically all around the world, but what is important is to compare cities from the same size and quite from the same culture, because many times we can compare some things with London or with Singapore, but it's really difficult to compare Bilbao with London or Singapore or who knows, or Las Vegas. And in this case, I think that, for example, for us, comparing with cities in Europe like Liverpool or Belfast or Copenhagen, I don't know if they are in that list, but it can be really interesting. So to compare things and cities especially, it must be compare things of the same level.
And I'm guessing, based on the definition of sexy, Jaana, that many other cities here in Spain are on that top tier of the top tier, of tier 2, right? Because it has all of that, wow, this is really cool. And we saw that in the last technological boom here in Spain, and that now has actually been steeped and marinated here in Bilbao. Anybody have questions here? I got a microphone. We've covered the first 2 parts of the way we'll be talking about again, build this summit. And again, we've talked about people, and we've talked about place. Any questions for our panelists here? Just raise your hand. Okay, I see one right over here, and I'm going to bring the microphone to you. I believe it's on. Let's see if it's on. It is.
Okay, I mean, we've been talking about a number of these issues, but you've got an income gap in most major areas. You have an education gap. You have an employment gap. You've got a digital gap. And this has led to anger we're seeing not only in the United States, but throughout Europe. I don't see you addressing this, because what's basically going to be happening is this anger is going to have a major impact on urban development. I'd like you to address that.
Good question. Who would like to address that?
So I'd like to just point out one of the differences between many European cities and the U.S. And you know, our constitutions are very different. So we have, in the U.S., devolved the power to the states, who in turn then give it to the local governments, right? So all the land use decisions being made in the U.S. are being made by local governments. And I think that it ends up being a very difficult thing. Cities all over the globe are attracting people because they are job centers. Not every city, but many, many cities. That's why you see such incredible growth in so many parts of the world, because people go there looking for an opportunity, which has historically always been the case. What's different is in the U.S., local groups who are politically strong try to prevent any changes from happening in their communities. Look at San Francisco as Exhibit A, right? That creates you know, a very tense and difficult situation. The city and others might want more housing and to be able to match the growing jobs with housing, but any given neighborhood says, you know, we've had enough. And I think that is going to continue to play out very poorly in the U.S. but it's not necessarily the same in cities all across the globe.
How do we solve that, Ansgar? I know you wanted to speak next.
Don't have the full answer, but I'm glad you raised the question, because it's definitely, we tend to have this kind of tech vision here, which is not addressing some of the more thornier issues. One of the things that we're currently looking at is vocational schools. As a company, we care because we need a workforce. We're basically driving digital transformation in many sectors of the industry. We see that our customers need another workforce, other skills. We need upskilling on the job, but we also need a lot of work to be done in vocational schools. And I think if you think about vocational schools, it's the place where the non-academic workforce is basically either getting the skills for the next job, or they don't get it. And this is where the split of the city, the income gap is actually created. So we as a company are now trying to really find an infrastructure of how we can transfer our knowledge that we have on digital transformation, make it usable for vocational schools in order to be able to educate a workforce which is on the winning side of globalization, not on the losing side. It's a small piece of it, but I think it's worthwhile looking at that sector of schools, which are usually undervalued because, I mean, we tend to be academics, right? We look at universities and we tend to forget about that layer of education.
So as you asked that question, I was feverishly punching in a new question for us to ask the audience here. And if we could pull up question number 4, and I wanted to get the questioner's name and what you thought the answer is to your question.
Dwayne Gaudier from Washington, D.C. I don't think they answered the question. You're seeing tremendous anger. Take a look at the Bondi area of outside of Paris. You're seeing education gaps in England, which led to a lot to Brexit. This income gap between the rich and poor is widening in every part of the world, even in China, if you take a look at some of their economics. You're really not addressing the issue of how can you start incorporating those who are really at the bottom of the level, and there's more and more people at that bottom, into this transformation.
Yeah, so
Thank you so much for that. And again, question number 4, if we can pull that up. Go ahead, a quick response. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, when I was thinking about the city question that you asked about where should we be looking to, I think, one, we ought to be looking to places where work has been disrupted. So to your point, not only is income being disrupted, but work is too. And I don't think that we are paying enough attention to what does a real city look like when you have a gig economy and there's a shared economy. We just don't know enough about that just yet. And then I think the second thing I would say about it is that we know that we're in the middle of this, we're in the middle of a digital revolution, not the beginning, not the end. And we know we might have another 30 years around that. And so we know what the ideas and what the vision possibly will look like, but we're doing very little in managing the process of how you get people over and through this process in a consistent and an effective way. So I don't know the answer to how we do it, but I know that if communities and cities and countries are not thinking about that, talking about it, and helping to craft what the future looks like, then we will have even more disruption coming out of people who are just this kind of populist movement where people are completely dissatisfied because they see the idea, but they don't see how the execution is in line.
So that's a great lead up to our question right now. We have 45 seconds. If you could pull out your apps, I'm very interested in what you think, because that was a fantastic question coming out of Washington, D.C. It's something we talk about on our network a lot. As we have seen this across the world and where I've been on the ground, that is often a topic when I'm talking to folks in the streets, they're asking that question. So I'd be interested in all of your responses to this question. Over the past decade, waves of populism have now spanned the globe. Who or what has urban development left behind during this third digital wave? Who or what has been left behind in this digital space that we're living in this third wave? And 10 more seconds on that. So I know, Jaana, you want to talk about this, and then we're going to go to Xabier, then I'm going to get one more
if I
question.
may go back to the question and try to answer it from the perspective of what we at McKinsey have done specifically on that question. And I think the challenge that we were facing was that we have 70 million young people unemployed in the world, and at the same time, 45% of the companies that we talk to tell them that they can't find the talent or what they are looking for. So what we have done is that we have studied a non-profit arm called Generations that basically in very specific locations, one of them in Spain, they also are in the US, Mexico, India, and we have basically worked with companies to identify the kind of skills they are looking for, found and recruited the talent and educated them directly for those jobs. So I think it is that mismatch between the young folks who we are not educating for the jobs of the future and the businesses who don't have the talent they need. And I think that is the best position for us, or the best link to make, so that we can actually bring more folks into the productive workforce. So that's my short answer, at least a start. Obviously there is many, many other issues, but that's our perspective.
Xabier, and then Harriet.
Okay. Yeah, well, I will answer my own part of this question, that it's neighborhoods, and it's really connected to the question of the people. And because Bilbao has 39 neighborhoods, 8 districts, and probably one of the most important commitments at the political level for a long-term vision, it's that the investment have been made in every neighborhood. And that's about social cohesion, but that's also about giving opportunities to every citizen, so not to have two speeds of development, and that has something to be with
that. I think he's off a lot of synapses in our brains here. I'm thinking of outside of Atlanta, or right downtown Atlanta, how they left behind communities and neighborhoods.
I mean, I think this is the gentleman's question. I wouldn't say it's not gee whiz technology. Human settlement patterns have grown increasingly segregated by race and income. You know, all around the world, when you talk about unrest outside of Paris, you know, Paris, the city center, is where the wealthy live and the poor live on the edge. That's a pattern that is the reverse of what used to be true in the US, but that is also changing. The problem is the economic exclusivity of neighborhoods, and if anything, technology makes it worse, because you can live knowing only the people who think exactly like you. They might be across the globe, but it doesn't help you to necessarily know your neighbors, or to, even in statistically mixed income neighborhoods, for people to get together and know each other, the longtime residents and the newcomers, and think about a common future. So I think for me, you know, I'd love to talk about how technology might bridge some of these divides, but that is a pattern that's growing increasingly common across the world, and I don't see how it leads to anything but unrest and a lack of social cohesion.
I don't need this. I was just thinking about this because I was just up at Silicon Harlem. Two things you wouldn't put together: Silicon Harlem, Silicon Valley, and Harlem, just north of, northern parts of Manhattan, north of 96th Street, as they like to say in Manhattan. They're putting two very different ideas together to try to at least answer what the questioner was asking about. Is that what we need to do? Pull together things that are absolutely what you would think would not come together, but could succeed together?
Well, I think that anytime you do that, you bring innovation together. But who I would say is missing up there, and this is a terrible answer, it's quite political, is the Trump supporters. Right? Like,
you went there.
Donald, I am going to go there. I mean,
I tried. I'm sitting down.
You know, they are being left behind.
Yeah.
I mean, so you have in the U.S. in particular, traditional white working class, middle class families who feel like the future is slipping through their fingers and they can't figure it out, and so they're responding. This is my opinion, obviously, with anger. And so I think it's not just about we're looking at communities of colors or disenfranchised communities who can't find their way in the new economy. I think that you have whole swaths of the populace who can't find their way in the new economy. And we're not creating a pathway for them. So when we talk about urbanization, and most of them have grown up in a time where we have focus on suburbanization, then they find themselves very difficult to really see how you navigate to this new future.
Okay, I've got any more questions here in the audience on the first two topics? Anybody want to raise their hand? Oh, great, okay.
Once you say Trump, as I am coming from Turkey, we have similar story in Turkey, leaving behind, but what I would like to raise as an issue is the refugee issue. So we are facing around in the Syrian neighborhood, which we are kind of in the in between Europe and in this refugee wave. It's a huge problem, and digital and smartphones are one of the key connectivity that they have hope. So my question goes on this refugee problem, how we can discuss solutions, because now problem is over there, and now we are waiting new wave from Mosul, 1 million more people, and this is going to be a huge wave for all around the world. So I would like to get these ideas on refugee issues, how cities will cope with it.
Thank you so much. A great question as we look at so many cities across the world, starting with the Arab Spring of the issue of refugees. Quickly, and then we're going to move to our last section. Who would like to react to that question?
I would say that in the US, for the last 50 years, any city that really grew significantly had a significant component of foreign immigration in their growth, and the places that didn't welcome immigrants, the Baltimores, the Pittsburghs for quite a long time until recently, the St. Louis, had no growth. And I think, particularly in a nation of immigrants like the United States, it always struck me as bizarre that people had such short memories about what it meant to be able to come to a place so that you and your family could have more opportunity. And I think that immigration for a lot of places in Detroit, I think, is one of those places. It means vitality, it means new investment, it means repopulation. And I think that we are living in a world where immigrants that need and desire to immigrate, whether it's coming from a crisis or fleeing a place affected by climate change, that this is going to be more and more the pattern that we have to experience, and figuring out how to have a dialogue about welcoming newcomers is going to be very critical.
Mm-hmm. And I think the cities that are going to crack that nut and do that well will thrive in the future even more than they did in the past, because of the fact that population growth is going to slow down. So it's going to be a necessary condition. And I think it comes back to education, as we talked before. I often think about that, comparing the financial district in San Francisco, where I work, and the financial district in Toronto. I'm always struck by the diversity of the faces that go with the exact same looking suits in Toronto. I think there is something that city has done exceptionally well by bringing in a lot of folks from around the world and having a group across the different kinds of occupations that comes from different backgrounds. And I wish we would see more of that, because we need it. I mean, that's how the world is going to be. And cities that do that better now will surely thrive in the future.
Yeah, definitely. We need to integrate people, and we only have to look to our past as the Basque country, and to look the past of the Spanish government and how it has been with the civil war in the first years of the last century, and even Basque country, how bringing people from other autonomous communities from Spanish regions came to Basque country. So we can look to our past and look to the future, and to be more integrative. I don't know if this is the word.
It is.
But we have to work on this, because Bilbao and Basque country, as other cities and regions all around Europe, we are losing population, and we need people.
So Xabier, how do you talk about the gaps that have been brought up so far? We actually have already moved into our third section, which is economy, and how the economies need to maintain some sense of equality, right? Equitable growth. And we moved right into it fairly seamlessly here. How do you talk about it on the city level? You're sitting down with the mayor, who was so eloquent earlier. What is it that you say? Remember these neighborhoods. Remember these communities, is what you were saying.
Yeah, because one of our commitments is that the development of the city must be well balanced, and the opportunities of jobs must be for everyone. So here in our case, and this is not only about Bilbao, it's about the Basque country, we have a really strong public support for skills and also for grants to try to people to get more integrate. But again, I'm taking the words of my mayor, for us the economic development is one of the key aspects now, because even our unemployment rate is better than the rest of Spain, we have to admit that we have problems on that. The unemployment rate of our city is around 15%. So it's an important unemployment rate, it's huge, and we need to improve. And probably if we look at the profiles of the people in this city that are unemployed, 60% of the people have lower skills. So there we must do some efforts. This is not only about the city, it's about the Basque region, the Basque government,
Yeah.
but that's important.
And so I think of Detroit here because it went through this evolution that's been asked, and still going through it, isn't it, about gaps as it moves to its next phase. Yet the area that Detroit sits in is an area of reshoring or onshoring. That concept is quite dynamic in the Midwest right now. How is it that Detroit has talked about the vast numbers who live in poverty?
So I think that Detroit is coming, as it's going through its recovery, it does what it's doing exactly what most cities do when they come through recovery, is focus on your strengths, spend your time there. And then as you see that, then the growth is exponential, it matures. But if you're not intentional about making sure that you're talking about the integration of these communities and that you're creating equitable opportunity and equitable access to opportunity, then what you end up getting, and this is no disrespect to like a Seattle or New York City, but you have very high economic segregation there. And so I think that Detroit is definitely on the path to trying to make sure that we're having an inclusive conversation about economic growth for all residents in that community, but I think we're spending entirely too little on doing that, and I don't think it's a shared enough vision. So it's happening in pockets of conversations rather than the driver. There's no intentionality around economic integration, and I don't think that Detroit is alone in that. I actually think that most cities are not having that conversation about how we have intentional economic integration.
Ansgar, how has HV or how have you been part of this conversation from the business perspective? Because there are many legs to this stool that is needed to be built, and business is one of them.
Yeah,
Shoring up the gap.
Absolutely.
Shoring up the gap.
Yeah, so I mean, what we see currently is that global value chains are redistributed because new technologies are actually integrated. So look at manufacturing. We used to put it away from the city centers because it was dangerous. Manufacturing created heat or pressure, both unhealthy for people, so we moved it out of the city. Now with stuff like 3D printing, we will not have that problem anymore. So what we might see is more seamless integration of workplace, manufacturing, consumption, urban cities as centers of consumption with mass customization products, which will allow, again, a city which we've seen in the past, right? In Berlin, the biggest companies in Berlin were invented in the backyards of urban flats. That was in the middle of the city center, that wasn't somewhere outside. And that's the kind of a vision that we would promote, because we think there's great potential for greater sustainability of production. There is also great potential of developing cities in more livable places where people actually appreciate the closeness of job, family, free time, and do not commute between completely segregated parts of the city which are monothematic, more or less.
Harriet, excuse me, Harriet, from the perspective of policy, and I'm sorry I'm standing on here, it sounds like I'm screaming up at you right now, but Harriet, from the perspective of policy in HUD, how do you talk about the gaps that have been brought to bear so far in our conversation today, when we think about this larger economic level?
So it's a really bizarre situation in terms of the United States, because we think of it, if we had a tagline, it'd be land of opportunity, right? That economic mobility is what most Americans really believe we were founded on and that we have, when in fact there are dozens of places around the world that have much more economic mobility. In the US, a child's zip code is a strong predictor of lifetime earnings, of life expectancy, of health outcomes, of education level. I could go on.
Is there a silver bullet, though, to offset this opportunity, if we can call it that, to close the gap? Is there that you often talk about at HUD? Like, we should try to get this done because this is a silver bullet.
Well, we've talked about these patterns of settlement that segregate people by race and income, and that those things have gone on for generations, and that HUD is doing a lot to much more forcefully try to get better outcomes in terms of that integration. And I think that has enormous economic, educational, and life consequences for children born into poor households. And I don't think there's anything more important to be done in the world than to try to address that problem.
We have 5 minutes. I want to get some questions as we finish up this opening session, because it's setting up what we're going to be talking about again for the rest of the summit. Great, right here in front.
Hi, Madeline Janis, and I come from Los Angeles. There's a myth, it seems to me, out there that has to do with the lack of control that we can exert over kind of technological innovation. Somehow it's happening to us, the sharing economy, everything is happening to us, and that we have no control over it. When it seems to me that we have a lot of control. We have, government can make laws, and we have the ability to think about all kinds of things, the way we invest in insisting on community benefits in return. I just wonder if you could reflect, and a little bit, it kind of brings the second and the third together, is how could we be, for example, asserting our power over what we buy and how we invest to make sure that we're creating good jobs and community benefits?
Great question. Any other questions before our panel answers? We can give them 2 or 3 questions at the same time. Great. I'll come over to you here. Excuse me.
Thanks. Chris Alvarado from Cleveland. I think, we hear a lot about place, the determinants of wealth and health tied to place, but I think it's important to say that, a single place, even down to the block level, you've got multiple communities there, some of whom are benefiting from technology and others of whom are living right next door and aren't. I don't know if the geographic scope should be there or whether it actually has to be on a household level.
Going even more micro. Yes. Exactly. Panelists? A question over here? Did I see? Okay. Any questions over here? Okay. Panelists?
Well, I can jump in on the first question. It is very clear. I've been studying personally for 10 years now the outcomes of industries in different locations, and it is very clear that you can't understand the outcome if you don't understand what the regulatory environment is. Whatever the industry, it is the laws and the regulation, what the government does, is critical for explaining any outcomes. And I think in a technological change world, that's even more true. So if we take the attitude that we are just going to wait to see what happens, it is certainly not going to be an outcome we all want. So when you look at cities, the cities that have really done something exceptionally well, it has been ones where the public and private sector come together and they share a vision of, I would just go back to what the mayor said, of what kind of city do we want, the North Star, that allows them to make, not only set priorities, but make some hard choices, because you sometimes need to make them. And I'll give an example of Oulu, Finland, which used to be, still is a wireless hub as a result of Nokia, the local government, the university, etc., coming together and saying, in the middle of northern part of Finland, we are going to really thrive and be a growth center for a new industry. And they all pulled on the same direction. They made sure they educated the folks. It really is, I think, the capacity of the cities to take a hard look at themselves, understand their DNA, look broad and deep on what's happening in the world, and really try to be proactive, because what they do will be critical on how we are going to all end up. And without it, I don't think we're going to end up in a place we want to be.
I would just add to that is that they say that there are only 3% of the population, of any population, are actually futurists. And what I'm often struck by is that the futurists tend to be elitist. They sit in a room, they talk about what's coming, and they're predicting the future. And I think to your point is that they're predicting the future from their limited view, not predicting the future from a collective view, a connective analysis of that. And I think if cities can figure out how to bring futuristic thinking and then bring that democratic muscle, that's a part of our DNA across the whole transatlantic continuum. If you can bring those two together, I think that actually gives us a competitive positioning that helps us, especially as we think about like this global urbanization that's happening far more rapidly than we would have ever thought, and in different ways than our cities have developed and probably will evolve.
Quickly?
Yeah, just maybe silver bullets, yeah, they're in great demand. I think they don't exist, unfortunately. I think one of the things that we saw is that the quality of schools is a real issue when it comes to segregation. So as soon as the quality of schools is going down, the people who really care about the education of their kids, they simply move away, and you can't blame them for that, right? So if you look at housing prices, it's a pretty good predictor of how good the quality of the school actually is, and that's a great force which is ripping cities apart. So if I would have one suggestion is schools need to maintain or build up same levels of quality, otherwise you will never be able to stop the dynamics, the dynamics which pull a city apart. That's key, and I think that's something where governments need to focus on rather than trying to tamper with the housing prices, like with crazy ideas in Germany of regulating housing prices. That's a free market that doesn't work, but you need to get the schools quality right, and that keeps actually neighborhoods together. If they believe that their children get a decent education there are probably less reasons to move away. So that would be my half a silver bullet, I don't know.
How do we talk about family, which was some of the idea? Thank you, Ansgar. How do we talk about family and its important part in this?
What's the paper of the family?
Yes, right. As the essential unit when we talk about development, right, closing the gaps.
Well, probably and especially in the Basque Country, family it's in the heart of the country, and how the family is the center of the social life. And in this case, I think that we have remarked the most important points, but considering the technology. I would like to finish just remarking that technology is really important because it's providing us so much information that we have to transform into knowledge to make better decisions. And that involves education, that involves social cohesion, that involves economic development. But technology itself is not a goal, it's an instrument. And taking again the idea from my partner to work in a private partnership cooperation, for us, we think that it's one of the most important ways to do it.
We are going to finish now with a lightning round. So I want you to respond with one word, just one word. And I'm going to go to Wilhelmina's fantastic drawing over here and just pull some words and phrases. And I want a one-word reaction from you. I can say as many words as I want. You only can say one. That's why we're going to close this, okay? So let's see. Greater global connections. Jaana.
Speed.
Xabier.
I'm sorry, can you...
Greater global connections. One word reaction.
Well, probably with the connection, the last one, connection.
Inevitable.
Inevitable.
Opportunity.
Acceleration.
Disruptive technologies. Ansgar.
Great thing.
Right thing? I think that's 2 words. I'm not counting. But Harriet?
I have 2 words. Monetizing capacity.
Monetizing capacity. Tonya?
Wealth creation.
Xabier?
To learn.
Jaana?
Disruption.
Collaboration is key. She has 2 hands shaking here. Jaana?
Connections.
Xabier?
A must.
A must.
Yeah.
Leadership.
Leadership. Ansgar?
Agree.
Competitiveness.
Okay, and Wilhelmina wants us to do this one. Technology often, nope, technology. Technology. Okay, we'll start with Tonya.
Equity.
Now this is Wilhelmina's, so it better be good here. Jaana?
Potential.
Potential. Xabier?
An instrument.
Ansgar?
Inevitable.
Harriet?
Change.
School quality. Harriet?
Land use.
Key.
Tonya?
I don't know.
Really?
Well, no, it's not that. I can't get it in one word. So if you would give me this, Richard, I would just say we have to get the guts and the chutzpah to actually do it.
Guts and chutzpah together.
Yeah,
there we go. I like that. Chutzpah. I like that's a good one.
It's future.
Future?
I actually was thinking future as well.
You were thinking
I was
chutzpah,
thinking-
weren't you? You were thinking chutzpah. I bet. Benchmark to you, Xabier. Benchmark.
It's collaboration.
Collaboration is the benchmark. Ansgar, you can't look away. I still gonna call you.
I should have did that.
A little bit overrated.
Oh, really? Okay.
Family wealth.
Economic mobility.
Improve.
Development muscle. I focus on muscle because Tonya brought it up. What are the muscles that need to be developed in these localities across the world? What is the muscle that needs to be developed?
Embracing change.
Collaboration.
Vision.
Vision muscle, that's a good thing. Xabier?
People.
Bilbao, okay.
No, people.
Oh, people. I was
People,
thinking
no,
you were
not
in
Bilbao.
It's acceptable.
course,
Because, you're here. This is your city. You can say
People.
whatever you want. Jaana.
I think regulation.
Fantastic. What we are missing in the conversation?
Optimism.
Yeah, probably I am agree with her. Probably I agree with
Optimism?
Yeah.
Growth.
Ansgar?
The nation state.
Inclusiveness. Inclusiveness.
And finally, Build 2016. This is a gimme. Build 2016. Jaana?
Hope.
Success.
Future.
A good start.
Learning.
All right, thank you all five of our panelists. Please give them a warm round of applause.
And please join me in thanking our wonderful moderator. If you guys could stay seated for 1 second, I just have a couple quick announcements before we head out to our fantastic reception at the Maritime Museum here in Bilbao. This has been a great start. It's hot in here. We need more air conditioning, but it's also great discussion on the stage and a really hot discussion online. So keep the tweets coming. We're actually trending in the region, which is really cool. And you know, there's such a richness and complexity to these issues, and I think it's fantastic that there's lots of disagreement, there's lots of new ideas, there's lots of questioning. So this sets the right stage for our breakout sessions tomorrow when we dive into these three topics. Speaking of that, in your app, you have in your personalized schedule the session that you pre-registered for. Please be aware that we expect you to go to that session. Thank you for your cooperation in advance. Please don't come up to me during the reception and ask to change your breakout, because I will kindly say no. Second, we have a transport from the hotel tomorrow, starting at 8:15 to get to the breakouts. As you know, when we do this work in Bilbao, we are in the city. So we're here tonight, we're in the city tomorrow, and we'll be tomorrow afternoon at our kind of work location, the Iberdrola Tower. So please be on time. Doesn't get too light that early in the morning here in Bilbao, I've noticed. So set your alarms, drink a strong cup of espresso, and get ready for the discussion tomorrow. When we leave here, we're going to exit the building and get on some shuttle buses to go to the Maritime Museum. Our gracious hosts, the city of Bilbao, have prepared a fantastic feast of Basque cuisine and wine. You'll learn about their culture. The Maritime Museum is a really great location with lots of exhibits about the history of the city. So we encourage you to explore it. And then finally, I don't have my badge on, but maybe SD, I could borrow your badge. You all have a QR code on your badge. This is for your business card function on SpotMe. For those of you who have been here before, you use the camera function on your app to take a picture of the QR code, and you immediately exchange contact details, if you allow it, with the person who you're exchanging business cards with. So this is to help facilitate the networking, and we encourage you to take advantage of that when you get to the reception. So thank you again to our panelists and to you, and we look forward to seeing you in our breakouts early tomorrow morning, where the discussion will continue. So thank you again.